Let's take a look at a number of very important issues related to the imagination. Not to individual imaginations or individual dreams, but rather to the collective imagination and to what we would refer to as social constructs. Truly imaginary things, things that do not have physical existence, but nonetheless influence the way people behave. We're going to call it international trade and imaginary things. We're only going to talk about 4 of the imaginary things in this presentation: nations, borders, governments, and money. This list of imaginary items may not seem imaginary, but they are social constructs and they depend entirely on broad belief in their existence and value. In this presentation, we will discuss each idea, its nature, and its relationship to the others, to the other ideas in the presentation. So we're only going to touch on these 4. But keep in mind, first of all, there is the whole notion of nation. That is, the concept of nation is obviously central to international business. With no nations, there's no such thing as international business. You have to have countries. And that means several things. For one thing, countries authorize who gets to sign things like free trade agreements or treaties of any kind. So countries like the United States or the Russian Federation exist because they are recognized by their own people and the people in other countries. This recognition means that these same people also recognize other imaginary things like borders, governments, and money. Borders are not actual lines drawn on the ground. They are legal constructs recognized by one country and its neighbors. They're defined by treaties and common agreement. They're crucial because they determine which government's laws apply on a specific plot of land. Think about what happens when a group of people disagree about borders. The Russian Federation is a good example. They took the Crimea from the Ukraine. As the more powerful country, Russian Federation imposed its will on the Ukraine. It was a complicated situation. The Ukraine was not a member of NATO, for example, and consequently, Europe was not obligated to come to its defense. But the people who were Ukrainian and subject to Ukrainian law are now Russian and subject to Russian Federation law. Wars are often fought and have historically been fought over these imaginary lines. These imaginary lines may also only be crossed under circumstances that are allowed by the governments that control those borders. Think about the issue of Brexit and the European Union. That's simply changing lines with respect to trade. We'll talk about that some more. Governments also exist by agreement. They are not some building somewhere. They are a source of power. And they might be dictatorships imposed by a minority, or they might be democracies supported by the general population. But official recognition matters. Someone is allowed to sign a treaty. They can sign a trade agreement. Without official recognition, the signature doesn't mean anything. People have to go along with it. Consider China and Taiwan. China objects to any recognition of Taiwan as a country that is distinct from China, although many in Taiwan see themselves as Taiwanese, not Chinese. Those countries that challenge China on this point are often subject to economic and political sanctions. This means that Taiwan has trouble creating its own trade agreements, and because potential trading partners have no desire to offend the much larger and more powerful China, Taiwan has trouble making its own agreements. Money, of course, is fundamental to any kind of business, let alone international. But it is also fundamentally a tautology. Money is only valuable because we value it. That's all. It doesn't matter if it's some Caesar's head stamped on a piece of silver or a piece of paper with the head of a dead president or the Queen or whoever. It is only valuable because people agree in a very broad sense that it is valuable. It is kept valuable by faith. As it says on the slide, it's kind of like clapping to keep Tinkerbell alive in the Peter Pan movie. Money is issued by governments. So faith in the government and faith in the currency are often tied to one another. Stable currencies are issued by stable governments. Often when people lose faith in a government, they also lose faith in the currency it issues. If you look at reserve currencies like the US dollar, the euro, the Japanese yen, the Swiss franc, and so on, you're also looking at stable governments. These governmental entities rarely change administrations through revolutions. Rather, they change the people in the government by way of legal means, usually those defined in their own constitutions. Clear example would be Venezuela, where the government has, in practical terms, really collapsed, and now we have a problem. And if you look at the inflation rate, which you can see in the image on the slide, it's going nuts. Now, there are some other examples as well, and we'll continue them as we end the slideshow.